In Stone Creek, Montana, a struggling single mother was about to confront her family's buried secrets. What started as settling her grandfather's quarry inheritance took a shocking turn when her 12-year-old son discovered geological formations worth $220 million. Sarah Rodriguez wasn't your typical night shift nurse. For 14 years, she had rebuilt her life after abandoning her grandfather's mining legacy, known for fierce independence and protecting her brilliant son Danny. When corporate predators descended on their discovery, Sarah had no idea she was walking into a battle that would test everything she'd learned about survival and sacrifice. What began as a quick property sale became a fight for environmental justice and family redemption that would forever change Stone Creek. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, wedged between a final notice from the electric company and a medical bill that made Sarah's chest tighten. She recognized the Montana return address immediately, the same serif font the law firm had used 14 years ago when they'd sent her grandfather's harsh response to her graduation announcement. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, not from the early October chill that seeped through the apartment's thin walls, but from memories she'd spent years burying. "Mom!" Danny's voice carried from the kitchen, where he sat hunched over his geology textbook, eating cereal with one hand and taking notes with the other. At 12, he possessed the kind of focused intensity that reminded Sarah of herself at that age, before life taught her that passion was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Just bills, honey?" she called back, though her voice caught on the lie. The letter trembled in her grip as she read the formal language that changed everything. Deceased. Sole beneficiary. Limestone quarry. Significant tax obligations. Her grandfather was dead. Eduardo Rodriguez, the man who'd built an empire from stone and stubbornness, who'd raised her after her parents died, who'd cut her from his life the day she chose art over the family business. He was gone. And somehow, impossibly, he'd left her everything. The quarry. The land. The crushing weight of a legacy she'd never wanted. Sarah sank onto the threadbare couch, her nurse's scrubs still damp from her shift at the hospital. She'd worked a double to cover for Jenny, whose kid had the flu, the same kind of favor Sarah could never ask for in return because there was no one to watch Danny. The irony wasn't lost on her that she spent her nights caring for others while barely keeping her own life together. The letter mentioned tax debts, equipment loans, environmental assessments pending. Numbers that made her medical bills look manageable. She closed her eyes, feeling the familiar pressure behind her temples that meant another migraine was coming. The oncologist had warned her that stress could trigger them more frequently now. Another gift from the cancer that had tried to kill her last year. "Mom, did you know that limestone can contain fossils that are over 400 million years old?" Danny's enthusiasm carried across the small apartment, and Sarah managed to smile despite everything. Her son had inherited her grandfather's love of the earth, though he approached it with scientific wonder rather than commercial calculation. "That's amazing, baby," she replied, folding the letter and tucking it under a stack of bills. But her mind was already racing, calculating. The quarry would have to be sold quickly, quietly. Whatever she could get for it would have to cover the debts and hopefully leave enough to finally catch up on everything else. The memory hit her without warning, as they always did. She was 18 again, standing in her grandfather's office, her art school acceptance letter crumpled in his massive fist. His voice, thick with the accent he'd never lost despite 50 years in Montana. "You want to paint pictures while our family's work crumbles? While everything I built turns to dust." She'd been so young, so certain that leaving was the only way to breathe. The scholarship to Portland had seemed like salvation, a chance to become someone other than Eduardo Rodriguez's granddaughter, someone who created beauty instead of carving scars in the earth. But art didn't pay medical bills or keep the lights on or buy groceries for a growing boy who needed new shoes every 6 months. "Mom!" Danny appeared in the doorway, his dark hair sticking up in the back the way it always did when he'd been reading. He had her grandfather's eyes, intelligent, penetrating, missing nothing. Sometimes it unnerved her, the way he could read her moods before she'd even acknowledged them herself. "What's wrong?" he asked, settling beside her on the couch with the careful precision he applied to everything. Even at 12, Danny understood that their world was held together by routines and caution, that sudden changes meant trouble they couldn't afford. Sarah looked at her son, this brilliant, curious boy who'd never complained about their cramped apartment or her exhaustion or the way other kids sometimes whispered about the single mom who worked nights and wore the same 3 scrubs to parent-teacher conferences. He deserved so much more than she could give him. "We might need to take a trip," she said finally. "To Montana." Danny's eyes lit up immediately. "Montana? Like where you grew up? With the mountains and the—" "With your great-grandfather's quarry," Sarah interrupted gently. "He died, Danny, and apparently he left it to us." She watched her son process this information, saw the moment when excitement overtook grief for someone he'd never met. That was the blessing of childhood, the ability to find wonder even in loss. A real quarry? With limestone and maybe fossils? Danny's voice rose with possibility. "Mom, do you know what kinds of geological formations might be there? Montana has incredible mineral diversity, and limestone quarries can contain—" "Danny." Sarah's voice carried the weight of 14 years of careful budgeting and impossible choices. "We're not keeping it. We can't. We'll see what needs to be handled, and then we'll sell it. Quickly." The light dimmed in Danny's eyes, but he nodded with the mature acceptance that broke her heart. He'd learned too young not to want things they couldn't have. That night, after Danny was asleep, Sarah sat at their tiny kitchen table with the letters spread before her, surrounded by bills and bank statements and the harsh mathematics of survival. The quarry might be worthless, abandoned mines often were. But even worthless land had value to someone, and someone willing to take on the debts might pay enough to change their lives. She thought about her grandfather's hands, massive and scarred from decades of working stone. She remembered the way he'd taught her to identify different rock types, his voice softening only when he spoke about the Earth's ancient secrets. Before art became her rebellion, geology had been their shared language. "La Tierra remembers everything, Mija," he told her once, holding up a piece of limestone studded with tiny shell fossils. "Every creature that lived, every change that came. Stone tells the truth when people forget how." Sarah pulled out her phone and found the cheapest flights to Montana she could manage. 3 days from now, she and Danny would return to a place she'd sworn never to see again. They'd assess whatever Eduardo Rodriguez had left behind, settle his debts, and walk away with whatever remained. It would be quick. It would be practical. It would be nothing more than closing a chapter that should have ended 14 years ago. She had no way of knowing that her grandfather's final secret was waiting in the limestone walls of his quarry, or that Danny's passion for geology would uncover something that would change their lives forever. All she knew was that survival meant moving forward, one careful step at a time, carrying as little of the past as possible. But some legacies, like the fossils embedded in ancient stone, refuse to stay buried no matter how deep you try to bury them. The rental car's engine coughed as Sarah downshifted for the mountain grade, the same way her grandfather's old Ford used to wheeze on these switchback roads. Danny pressed his face to the passenger window, his breath fogging the glass as he stared at the limestone cliffs that rose like ancient sentinels on either side of the highway. "Look at those stratification layers, Mom," he said, his voice tight with excitement. "You can see millions of years of geological history right there in the rock face." Sarah's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Every mile brought back memories she'd spent 14 years trying to forget. The scent of pine and limestone dust, the way the mountains seemed to press down on everything below them, the claustrophobic feeling of being trapped in a world too small for her dreams. Stone Creek hadn't changed much. Main Street still consisted of 3 blocks of weathered storefronts, half of them empty now, their windows papered over with faded for lease signs. The old mining equipment store had become a dollar store. Murphy's Hardware hung on, though the paint was peeling and the sign listed slightly to the left. Rose's Diner still anchored the corner of Main and Cedar, its neon sign flickering the same pink welcome it had when Sarah was Danny's age. She pulled into the diner's parking lot, needing a moment to steady herself before facing whatever waited at the lawyer's office. The familiar bell chimed as they entered, and Sarah felt 12 years old again, following her grandfather's massive frame through this same door after long days at the quarry. Sarah Rodriguez. The voice came from behind the counter, warm and knowing. Rose McKinnon looked older. Her silver hair was thinner, her movements slower, but her eyes held the same sharp intelligence that had made her the unofficial keeper of Stone Creek's secrets for as long as Sarah could remember. Rose. Sarah's voice caught slightly. She hadn't expected the flood of emotion that came with seeing this woman who had been more of a grandmother to her than anyone else. Rose came around the counter, wiping her hands on her apron, and pulled Sarah into a hug that smelled of coffee and cinnamon rolls. "I'm so sorry about Eduardo, honey. He was a stubborn old goat, but he loved you something fierce." Sarah pulled back, blinking away tears she hadn't expected. "This is Danny, my son." Rose turned her penetrating gaze on the boy, who straightened under her scrutiny. Well, you've got your great-grandfather's eyes, young man, and I bet you've got his curiosity about what's under the ground." Danny nodded eagerly. "I study geology. Mom says great-grandfather had a limestone quarry. Had the biggest limestone operation in 3 counties, Rose said, leading them to a corner booth. "Still does, technically, though it's been shut down for 2 years now. Coffee, Sarah? Hot chocolate for the boy?" As Rose bustled away, Sarah studied the diner's familiar interior. The same red vinyl booths, the same black and white checkered floor, the same collection of local photographs covering the walls. But there were empty tables that should have been full, and the photographs seemed faded, like memories losing their color. Rose returned with their drinks and slid into the booth across from them. "So you're here about the inheritance." "I'm here to sell it," Sarah said firmly. "Whatever's left of it, anyway." The lawyer's letter mentioned debts. Rose's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "Granite's been taking care of things, keeping the equipment oiled, the fences mended. He never stopped believing you'd come back." "Granite McKinnon is still alive?" Sarah couldn't hide her surprise. Her grandfather's foreman had seemed ancient when she was 18. "Alive and ornery as ever. He'll want to see you." Rose paused, studying Sarah's face. "This town's been dying slowly since the mine closures. Eduardo's quarry was one of the last operations keeping people employed. When he shut it down after his first heart attack. He had a heart attack 2 years ago. Slowed him down considerable, but he wouldn't sell to any of the big companies sniffing around. Said he was waiting for the right person to take over." Rose's gaze was steady, meaningful. "Guess we know who he had in mind." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from the lawyer. "Running late. Can we meet at 2 p.m. instead of 1? She showed the message to Rose, who nodded approvingly. "Good. Gives you time to see the place first. Granite's probably up there now. He goes every day, rain or shine." Rose pulled a set of keys from her apron pocket. "Eduardo gave me these years ago in case of emergency. I reckon this qualifies." Sarah stared at the keys, heavy, old-fashioned, worn smooth by decades of use. Taking them felt like crossing a line she couldn't uncross. "The quarry's just 5 miles up Cedar Road," Rose continued. "You can't miss it. It's the giant hole in the mountainside." Danny practically vibrated with anticipation. "Can we go now, Mom? Please?" Sarah looked at her son's eager face, then at Rose's knowing smile, and felt the weight of inevitability settling over her like limestone dust. "I guess we should see what we're dealing with." The drive up Cedar Road was a journey through time. Sarah remembered racing her grandfather's pickup truck along this same route, the radio blasting classic rock while he told her stories about the different rock formations they passed. Danny provided his own commentary now, pointing out geological features with the same enthusiasm she'd once felt. The quarry appeared suddenly as they crested a hill, a vast amphitheater carved into the mountainside, its limestone walls rising in terrace steps that caught the afternoon light. It was bigger than Sarah remembered, more imposing. Water had collected in the bottom, creating a blue-green lake that reflected the sky. "Wow," Danny breathed. "Mom, this is incredible. Do you see how the limestone beds are exposed? And look at those fault lines. You can trace the geological history of the entire region right here." Sarah parked near the equipment shed, where a familiar figure emerged. James McKinnon looked exactly as she remembered him. Tall, lean, weathered like the rocks he'd spent his life working with. His hair was white now instead of gray, but his eyes were the same sharp blue that had always seen too much. Sarah. His voice was gruff with emotion. About time you came home. The word hung in the air between them, home. Sarah had spent 14 years insisting that Portland was home, that this place was just where she'd grown up. But standing here, looking at the quarry that had shaped 3 generations of her family, she felt something shift inside her chest. Granite. She stepped forward, and he enveloped her in a hug that smelled of motor oil and honest work. Your grandfather never stopped talking about you, he said quietly. Never stopped hoping you'd come back and take over what he built. Sarah pulled back, shaking her head. I can't. I'm not that person anymore. I'm a nurse, not a quarry operator. I don't know the first thing about running a business like this. Granite's smile was sad but knowing. Eduardo said the same thing when his father left him this place. Said he was just a laborer, didn't have the head for business. But the land teaches you what you need to know if you listen. Danny had wandered to the quarry's edge, his geological hammer in hand, already examining the exposed rock faces with scientific intensity. Sarah watched him, recognizing something of herself in his wonder, something of her grandfather in his careful attention to detail. The boy's got the gift, Granite observed, following her gaze. Sees what others miss. As they stood there, the afternoon sun slanting across the limestone walls, Sarah felt the weight of decision pressing down on her. The practical part of her mind was already calculating how quickly she could find a buyer, how much the equipment might be worth, whether the debts would consume everything. But another part of her, a part she'd thought dead and buried, was stirring to life. It whispered of roots and legacy, of the possibility that some things were worth more than their price tag. Danny's excited shout echoed across the quarry. Mom! Come look at this. There's something different about this rock formation. Danny's voice carried across the quarry with an urgency that made Sarah's pulse quicken. She hurried down the limestone steps, Granite close behind, their footsteps echoing off the quarry walls. Danny stood about 30 feet down the eastern face, his geological hammer poised over a section of rock that looked different from the surrounding limestone. Darker, with veins of metallic luster that caught the afternoon light. Look at this, Danny said, his voice tight with excitement as they approached. This isn't limestone. The crystal structure is completely different, and see these inclusions? He pointed to dark specks scattered through the rock like pepper and salt. These look like rare earth elements, maybe neodymium or europium. Sarah felt her chest tighten. Danny, you can't just start breaking rocks. This isn't our property yet, and actually it is. Granite's voice was quiet, thoughtful. He knelt beside Danny, examining the rock formation with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent 40 years reading stone. Your grandfather left detailed instructions about mineral rights. Everything above and below ground belongs to you now. But what Danny's found, Sarah said, looking at the unremarkable dark streaks. It's probably just iron ore or something common. Danny shook his head emphatically. Mom, I've been studying this stuff for 3 years. Look at the way it fractures, the metallic sheen. And this green tarnish here, that's characteristic of rare earth oxidation. He pulled out his phone and took several photos, then carefully chipped off a small sample with his hammer. Granite was silent, studying the rock face with an expression Sarah couldn't read. Finally, he spoke. Eduardo had this section tested about 6 months before he died. Brought in some fancy geologist from the university. Never told me what they found, but he started acting different after that. More protective of the quarry. Protective how? Sarah asked. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Turned down 3 different offers from mining companies. Good offers. Said the timing wasn't right, that he was waiting for something. Granite's weathered hands traced the dark veins in the rock. Maybe he was waiting for someone who'd know what to do with whatever this is. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text reminder about the lawyer's appointment. "We need to go. We can figure this out later." "Mom." Danny's voice carried a gravity that stopped her mid-sentence. He was staring at his phone screen, his face pale. "I looked up the geological survey data for this region. According to the Montana Bureau of Mines, this area sits on what might be the largest unexplored rare earth deposit in North America." The words hung in the air like dust motes, heavy with implication. Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest that meant her world was about to shift in ways she couldn't control. "Even if that's true," she said carefully, "we're not equipped to deal with mining operations. We're talking about selling this place, Danny, to someone who knows what they're doing." "But Mom." "But nothing." Sarah's voice carried the authority of someone who'd learned to make impossible decisions quickly. "We're already in over our heads with the taxes and debts. We can't take on something this complicated." The drive to the lawyer's office was tense. Danny sat clutching his rock sample, occasionally glancing at his phone to research rare earth mining processes. Sarah tried to focus on the practical questions she needed to ask: property values, debt totals, how quickly they could arrange a sale. The law office occupied the second floor of what had once been Stone Creek's bank building. Samuel Morrison, the lawyer who'd sent the inheritance letter, was younger than Sarah had expected, probably fresh out of law school and handling estate cases for the rural practice that couldn't afford more experienced attorneys. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said, shaking her hand with nervous efficiency. "I'm sorry for your loss. Your grandfather was quite a character." They settled into chairs that had seen better decades while Morrison shuffled through files that seemed thicker than they should be for a simple estate transfer. "Let me be direct," Sarah said. "What are the debts? What's the property worth? And how quickly can we sell?" Morrison's expression grew uncomfortable. "Well, that's where things get complicated. The debts are substantial, approximately $180,000 in equipment loans, back taxes, and environmental compliance fees. But the property assessment is problematic." "Problematic how?" "Your grandfather commissioned several geological surveys in his final months. The results are sealed per his instructions, but there have been inquiries. Significant inquiries from major mining corporations." Danny leaned forward in his chair. "What kind of inquiries?" Morrison glanced at Sarah for permission before answering. "Titan Mining Corporation has made 3 separate offers for the property in the past 6 months. The most recent was for $2.8 million, contingent on mineral rights included." Sarah felt like the air had been sucked from the room. $2.8 million? For a played-out limestone quarry? "That's what raised red flags for your grandfather," Morrison continued. "Companies don't offer that kind of money unless they know something. He became convinced that someone was trying to acquire the property for less than its true value." "So what's the true value?" Danny asked, his rock sample clutched in his small hands like a talisman. Morrison opened another file, revealing survey reports and geological assessments. "According to the sealed reports, if the rare earth deposit is as extensive as preliminary testing suggests, the mineral rights alone could be worth, well, the estimates range from $50 million to over $200 million. The number landed like a physical blow. Sarah gripped the arms of her chair, feeling dizzy. "That's impossible." "I thought so too," Morrison admitted. "But rare earth elements are incredibly valuable right now. They're essential for electronics, wind turbines, electric car batteries. China controls most of the global supply, so finding a domestic source. Why didn't my grandfather tell me?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Morrison pulled out a sealed envelope marked with Sarah's name in her grandfather's distinctive handwriting. "He left this for you. Said to give it to you after I'd explained the situation." With trembling fingers, Sarah opened the envelope and unfolded a single sheet of paper. Her grandfather's words, written in the careful script she remembered from her childhood. "Mija, if you are reading this, then the stubborn old man is finally gone and you have come home to clean up his mess. I know you think I cut you out of my life, but I never stopped loving you. I never stopped believing you would come back when you were ready. The quarry holds more than limestone. It holds the future, your future, Danny's future. But it also holds danger. There are people who will try to take from you what I couldn't protect alone. Be careful who you trust. Be smarter than the old man was. The deposit is real. Dr. Elena Vasquez at Montana State University has the complete reports. She is someone you can trust. But move quickly. Word spreads fast in small towns, and wolves can smell opportunity from far away. I left you this burden not as punishment, but as the chance I never had, to choose your own path with the security to make it work. Use it wisely, Mija. Make me proud. Con amor. Abuelo Sarah read the letter twice, tears blurring the words. When she looked up, both Morrison and Danny were watching her intently. So what happens now? She asked. Morrison glanced at his watch. Well, you have some immediate decisions to make. Titan Mining's latest offer expires at close of business Friday. That's 3 days from now. And there's something else. Tommy Reeves from the town council has been asking questions about the property taxes. If they're not brought current within 60 days, the county can force a tax sale. How much do we need? $43,000, plus penalties. Sarah's heart sank. Even with her life savings, she was nowhere close to that amount. The bitter irony wasn't lost on her. Sitting on a potential fortune but unable to afford the taxes to keep it. Danny spoke up quietly. Mom, maybe we should talk to this Dr. Vasquez. Get the real information before we decide anything. Sarah looked at her 12-year-old son, who was holding what might be a fragment of their future in his small hands. The practical part of her screamed to take Titan Mining's offer and run. But her grandfather's words echoed in her mind. Be smarter than the old man was. Set up a meeting with Dr. Vasquez, she told Morrison. And don't mention it to anyone else. If what my grandfather suspected is true, we need to understand what we're dealing with before the wolves start circling. As they left the lawyer's office, Sarah felt the weight of decision settling over her like the Montana sky. Vast, heavy, and full of storms she couldn't yet see coming. But for the first time since receiving the inheritance letter, she felt something other than dread. She felt the possibility that her grandfather's final gift wasn't a burden at all, but a chance to rewrite the story of their lives entirely. The drive to Montana State University took 2 hours through winding mountain roads that seemed to mirror Sarah's churning thoughts. Danny sat in the passenger seat, alternately studying his rock sample and researching rare earth elements on his phone, his excitement building with each article he read. Mom, listen to this, he said, scrolling through a geological survey report. Neodymium sells for about $100 per kilogram. Europium can go for $1,000 per kilogram. And if there's terbium in this sample. He looked up at her with wide eyes. Terbium is worth $3,000 per kilogram. Sarah kept her focus on the serpentine road ahead, trying not to let Danny's enthusiasm override her natural caution. Numbers on a screen were one thing. Turning rock into actual money was entirely different. Don't get ahead of yourself, sweetheart. We don't even know if what you found is significant, or if it can be extracted economically. But even as she said it, Sarah felt the pull of possibility. The meeting with Dr. Elena Vasquez had been arranged quickly. Too quickly for a busy university professor unless the subject matter was genuinely compelling. When Sarah had mentioned her grandfather's name and the quarry location, Dr. Vasquez had cleared her afternoon schedule immediately. The geology building at Montana State was a modern structure of glass and steel that seemed to grow from the mountainside itself. Dr. Vasquez met them in the lobby. A woman in her mid-40s with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and hands that showed the calluses of fieldwork. Sarah Rodriguez, she said, extending a firm handshake. I've been waiting 2 years to meet you. And you must be Danny. Your great-grandfather told me about your interest in geology. You knew my grandfather? Sarah asked as they rode the elevator to the 3rd floor. Eduardo consulted with me extensively about the quarry. He was cautious about the findings, worried about what would happen if the wrong people learned about the deposit before he could ensure it would be handled responsibly. Dr. Vasquez led them into a laboratory filled with sophisticated equipment, spectrometers, X-ray diffraction machines, and computers displaying complex molecular diagrams. The space hummed with the quiet efficiency of serious scientific work. Before we discuss your grandfather's surveys, Dr. Vasquez said, let's analyze what Danny found yesterday. She took the rock sample and placed it under a high-powered microscope connected to a computer screen. The magnified image revealed a complex crystalline structure shot through with metallic veins that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Interesting, Dr. Vasquez murmured, adjusting the focus. Danny, what made you think this contained rare earth elements? Danny leaned forward eagerly. The crystal structure looked different from typical limestone, and the way it fractured when I tested it, plus that metallic luster, it reminded me of pictures I'd seen of monazite and bastnasite deposits. Dr. Vasquez nodded approvingly. Very observant. Let's run a proper analysis. She moved the sample to a machine that looked like a small spacecraft, all smooth curves and blinking lights. X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy, she explained to Sarah. It'll tell us exactly what elements are present and in what concentrations. As the machine hummed to life, Dr. Vasquez pulled up a file on her computer. While we wait, let me show you what your grandfather discovered. The screen filled with charts, graphs, and geological cross-sections that meant nothing to Sarah but caused Danny to draw in a sharp breath. Dr. Vasquez began explaining the data with the patience of someone accustomed to translating complex science for non-experts. The quarry sits atop what we believe is a carbonatite intrusion, essentially, an ancient volcanic formation rich in rare earth elements. Your grandfather's surveys identified significant deposits of neodymium, europium, terbium, and dysprosium extending at least 200 meters down and covering roughly 15 acres. What does that mean in practical terms? Sarah asked. Dr. Vasquez pulled up another chart showing current market prices. Based on our conservative estimates, assuming a 2% concentration of rare earth oxides, which is quite good for this type of deposit, you're looking at approximately 50,000 tons of recoverable rare earth elements. Danny was furiously calculating on his phone. Mom, that's over $220 million worth of materials, even accounting for extraction costs. The deposit could be worth well over $100 million, Dr. Vasquez confirmed. Possibly much more if rare earth prices continue rising, which they likely will given current geopolitical tensions with China. Sarah felt dizzy. She gripped the lab bench to steady herself. But surely other people know about this? The mining companies that made offers. Your grandfather was very careful about who had access to the survey data, Dr. Vasquez said. But in the mining industry, information has a way of spreading. Titan Mining Corporation has been particularly aggressive in acquiring properties in this region. The X-ray fluorescence machine chimed, and Dr. Vasquez pulled up the results. Her eyebrows rose as she studied the data. Danny, you have excellent instincts. The sample shows 2% rare earth oxide concentration. That's exceptionally high. What my grandfather found. It's all real? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. It's real, it's valuable, and it's sitting on land you now own, Dr. Vasquez confirmed. But Sarah, you need to understand something crucial. Rare earth mining is complicated, both technically and politically. These elements are essential for modern technology, everything from smartphones to wind turbines to guided missiles. Countries go to war over resources like this. Danny looked up from his phone. Dr. Vasquez, what are the environmental impacts of rare earth extraction? The question earned him an approving nod. That's exactly what you should be asking. Traditional rare earth mining is incredibly destructive. It requires processing tons of ore with harsh chemicals, creates radioactive waste, and can contaminate groundwater for generations. Sarah felt her hope deflating. So we can't actually extract it without destroying the environment? Not necessarily. There are newer, more sustainable extraction methods being developed. In situ leaching, for example, can extract rare earths without traditional open-pit mining. It's more expensive, but given the value of your deposit, it could still be highly profitable. Dr. Vasquez turned back to her computer and opened another file. Your grandfather was exploring this option before he died. He'd been in contact with a Canadian company that specializes in environmentally responsible rare earth extraction. They were very interested in partnering with him. Why didn't he pursue it? Sarah asked. He was waiting for you. Dr. Vasquez's voice was gentle. Eduardo was convinced that you were the only person he could trust to make the right decisions about the deposit. He said you had an artist's eye for seeing the big picture, and a mother's instincts for protecting what matters. Sarah's throat tightened with emotion. After 14 years of believing her grandfather saw her as a failure, learning that he trusted her with something this significant was overwhelming. There's something else you need to know, Dr. Vasquez continued. Word is starting to spread about rare earth potential in this region. Titan Mining has been buying up mineral rights throughout the valley, often from families who don't understand what they're selling. If they can control enough of the surrounding area, they could pressure you to sell at below market value. How long do we have? Sarah asked. Not long. Geological surveys like this eventually become public record. My guess is you have weeks, maybe a month or two, before the major players make their moves. Danny had been quiet through most of this exchange, but now he spoke up. Mom, what if we could do this right? Extract the minerals responsibly, create jobs for the community, and still make enough money to. He trailed off, apparently overwhelmed by the possibilities. Sarah looked at her son, this brilliant boy who saw wonder in rocks and possibility where others saw only obstacles. Then she looked at Dr. Vasquez, who represented the kind of scientific integrity her grandfather had trusted. If we wanted to explore responsible extraction, Sarah said carefully, what would be the first steps? Dr. Vasquez smiled. The first step would be comprehensive environmental impact studies. I could help you design those. The second would be securing the property legally, making sure no one can challenge your mineral rights or force a sale through legal maneuvering. And the third would be choosing partners very carefully. There are people in this industry who would exploit your inexperience and the community's desperation. But there are also people who understand that doing things right can be more profitable in the long run than doing them fast. As they prepared to leave the university, Dr. Vasquez handed Sarah a thick folder. This contains copies of all your grandfather's survey data, plus my preliminary environmental assessments. Study it carefully. And Sarah, be very cautious about who you discuss this with. Word travels fast in small towns, and you're now the owner of something that powerful people want very badly. The drive back to Stone Creek was quieter, both Sarah and Danny lost in their own thoughts. As they descended into the valley, Sarah could see the quarry in the distance, looking deceptively peaceful in the afternoon light. It was hard to believe that this hole in the ground, which she'd always seen as a symbol of her grandfather's stubborn attachment to the past, might actually be the key to their future. But with that possibility came a weight of responsibility that made her chest tight with anxiety. She was a nurse, not a mining executive. How could she possibly navigate the complexities of environmental regulations, corporate negotiations, and community politics? Danny seemed to sense her thoughts. Mom, we don't have to decide everything right now. We just have to decide the next step. Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand. At 12, her son had already learned one of life's most important lessons, that the biggest journeys begin with single steps. The question now was whether she had the courage to take that first step into a future neither of them could fully imagine. The phone call came at 6:23 a.m., 3 days after their meeting with Dr. Vasquez. Sarah jolted awake in the motel room, her heart racing from the sharp electronic intrusion into dreams filled with limestone walls and corporate boardrooms. Danny stirred in the adjacent bed, mumbling something about mineral deposits before settling back into sleep. Ms. Rodriguez? The voice was crisp, professional, with the kind of confidence that came from having important conversations before most people had their first cup of coffee. This is Victoria Sterling from Titan Mining Corporation. I understand you've inherited some property that might interest our company. Sarah sat up, instantly alert. How did you get this number? Small towns have their ways of sharing information, Victoria said smoothly. I'm calling to congratulate you on your inheritance and to offer our assistance during what I'm sure is a difficult time. Losing a family member is always challenging, especially when they leave behind complex business obligations. The subtle threat wasn't lost on Sarah. "What do you want?" "I want to help you turn a burden into a blessing. I'm actually in Stone Creek right now. Flew in last night specifically to meet with you. Perhaps we could discuss your grandfather's property over breakfast? I'm told Rose's Diner makes excellent coffee." Sarah's mouth went dry. The speed with which Titan Mining had mobilized was both impressive and terrifying. "I'm not interested in selling." Victoria's laugh was warm, practiced. "Ms. Rodriguez, you haven't even heard our offer yet. And frankly, given the debt load your grandfather left behind, you might not have the luxury of being uninterested. The clock is ticking on those tax obligations." After ending the call, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking slightly. She dealt with aggressive collection agencies during her cancer treatment, but this felt different, more calculated, more dangerous. Victoria Sterling wasn't just trying to collect a debt. She was hunting something valuable. Danny woke up fully as Sarah was getting dressed. "Who is that, Mom?" "Someone who knows about the deposit," Sarah said grimly. "Get ready. We need to talk to Granite before we do anything else." They found Granite at the quarry, as Rose had predicted, performing his daily maintenance ritual on equipment that hadn't run in 2 years. He looked up as their rental car approached, and Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders even from a distance. "Heard there was a fancy corporate jet at the airport yesterday," he said without preamble. "Black sedan with tinted windows, been cruising Main Street since dawn." "Victoria Sterling from Titan Mining," Sarah confirmed. "She wants to meet." Granite spat into the limestone dust. "I know that name. She's the one who cleaned out the Morrison family up in Billings. Bought their ranch for a quarter of what it was worth after they got behind on payments. Turned it into an open-pit copper mine that poisoned the creek for 30 miles downstream." "She mentioned our tax obligations," Sarah said. "How much time do we really have?" 60 days from the date of the last notice. But Tommy Reeves has been sniffing around the county assessor's office. If he can get the town council to declare the property a public nuisance or environmental hazard, they could accelerate the timeline. Danny looked confused. "Who's Tommy Reeves?" "Local real estate developer," Granite explained, his voice thick with disgust. "His daddy worked for your great-grandfather years back, got fired for stealing equipment. Tommy's been trying to get his hands on this land ever since. Figures he's owed something." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. "Ms. Rodriguez, my offer expires at 5 p.m. today. After that, I'll be forced to explore other avenues to acquire the property. I hope we can resolve this amicably." "Victoria Sterling, she's giving me until 5 o'clock, Sarah said, showing the message to Granite. "Classic pressure tactic," he replied. "Make it seem urgent, like you're running out of options. Truth is, they need this property more than they're letting on." A dust cloud on the access road announced an approaching vehicle. The black sedan that emerged looked completely out of place against the industrial backdrop of the quarry. Too sleek, too expensive, too clean. It pulled to a stop near their group, and Victoria Sterling stepped out. She was younger than Sarah had expected, probably early 40s. With silver blonde hair pulled into a severe bun and a charcoal business suit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly salary. Everything about her projected competence and control, from her measured stride to the way she surveyed the quarry with calculating eyes. "Ms. Rodriguez," she said, extending a manicured hand. "Thank you for meeting with me. And you must be Danny. I've heard you have quite an interest in geology." Danny shrank slightly behind Sarah, his usual enthusiasm dampened by something in Victoria's smile that didn't reach her eyes. Victoria turned her attention to the quarry walls, and Sarah watched her expression change subtly. There was recognition there, confirmation of something she'd already suspected. "Impressive operation your grandfather built here. Such a shame to see it sitting idle." "It's not idle," Granite said firmly. "It's maintained and ready to resume operations when the time is right." Victoria's gaze shifted to him with the kind of dismissive assessment Sarah recognized from her hospital work, the look administrators gave to experienced nurses before explaining why their expertise was no longer valued. "Mr. McKinnon, isn't it?" 40 years of service to the Rodriguez family. That kind of loyalty is admirable, if perhaps misguided in current circumstances. She turned back to Sarah. The reality is that operating a quarry requires significant capital investment, environmental compliance expertise, and market connections. Without those resources, this becomes simply a very expensive hole in the ground. What exactly are you offering? Sarah asked. Victoria smiled, sensing an opening. $4.5 million cash, closing within 30 days. We'll assume all outstanding debts, handle all regulatory compliance issues, and provide a generous relocation package for you and Danny. The number hit Sarah like a physical blow. $4.5 million would solve every financial problem she'd ever had, provide for Danny's education, buy them a future free from the constant anxiety of bills and medical debt. That's a substantial increase from your previous offers, Granite observed suspiciously. Market conditions have changed, Victoria replied smoothly. Limestone demand is projected to increase significantly over the next decade. We believe this property has strong long-term potential. Sarah caught the careful phrasing, no mention of rare earth elements, no acknowledgement of the deposit's true value. Victoria was offering enough to seem generous while keeping the real treasure for Titan mining. I need time to think about it, Sarah said. Of course, but as I mentioned, this offer expires at 5 p.m. After that, Victoria shrugged elegantly. Well, let's just say that Titan Mining has other ways of acquiring properties we need. Legal ways, of course, but perhaps not as comfortable for the current owners. Danny stepped forward suddenly, his voice small but clear. Why do you want it so badly if it's just limestone? Victoria's smile faltered for just a moment, and Sarah saw something cold flicker in her eyes. Children often ask the most perceptive questions, don't they? The truth is, Danny, your family's quarry sits in a very strategic location. Sometimes the value of land isn't just what's in it, but what's around it. After Victoria left, the three of them stood in uncomfortable silence. Sarah felt the weight of decision pressing down on her like the Montana sky, vast, heavy, and filled with storms she couldn't predict. She knows about the deposit, Danny said finally. That's why the offer is so high, but still way less than it's really worth. Granite nodded grimly. And that threat about other ways of acquiring the property, that's real too. These companies have lawyers who specialize in finding ways to force sales. Environmental violations, tax liens, eminent domain claims for public good. Sarah's phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed a local number. Sarah, this is Sam Morrison, your grandfather's lawyer. We need to meet immediately. Tommy Reeves just filed a petition with the county to have the quarry declared a public safety hazard. If it goes through, they can force you to either bring it into compliance at considerable expense or sell it to cover remediation costs. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the walls closing in. Victoria Sterling hadn't been bluffing about other avenues. The attack was already underway, coordinated and ruthless. How long do we have? She asked. The hearing is scheduled for next Friday. 1 week. As Sarah ended the call, she realized that the choice was no longer between selling and keeping the quarry. The choice was between fighting for what her grandfather had left her or watching it be taken by people who saw her family's legacy as nothing more than an obstacle to profit. She looked at Danny, who was studying the quarry walls with the same intensity he brought to everything that mattered to him. Then she looked at Granite, whose weathered face reflected 40 years of loyalty to her family. We fight, she said quietly. Whatever it takes, we fight. The confrontation with Victoria Sterling had left Sarah feeling exposed, like prey being stalked by predators she couldn't see. That evening, she sat with Granite in Rose's diner after hours, the neon sign casting pink shadows across worn vinyl as Rose poured coffee that had been sitting too long on the burner. Your grandfather knew this day would come, Granite said, his weathered hands wrapped around his mug. Last 6 months of his life, he was different, secretive, started keeping files locked away, made me promise things I didn't understand at the time. What kind of promises? Granite stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkened street. He made me swear that if anything happened to him, I'd help you understand the truth about why you left. Said there were things you never knew, things that might change how you felt about him. Sarah's chest tightened. Granite, what aren't you telling me? Your grandfather never stopped trying to reach you after you left for art school. Every year on your birthday, Christmas, when Danny was born, he wrote letters. Dozens of them. Rose has them all, locked in her safe upstairs. The revelation hit Sarah like cold water. What? I never received any letters. Rose appeared beside their table, her expression grave. Eduardo was proud, Mija, but he wasn't cruel. Those letters. They tell a different story than the one you've been carrying all these years. The town hall meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, but by 6:30, Rose's parking lot overflowed with pickup trucks, sedans, and the occasional ATV. Sarah sat in her rental car, watching Stone Creek residents file into the community center. Some she recognized from childhood, others were strangers who'd moved to town in the years since she'd left. Danny fidgeted beside her, nervous energy radiating from his small frame. Maybe we should just take Victoria's offer, he said quietly. This feels like too much. Sarah studied her son's face, seeing her own anxiety reflected there. The past week had aged them both. The constant pressure from Titan Mining's representatives, the legal maneuvering by Tommy Reeves, the growing awareness that their decision would affect not just their family but an entire community struggling to survive. Your great-grandfather didn't back down from fights that mattered, she said, though her own resolve wavered. And this matters. Inside the community center, folding chairs had been arranged in neat rows facing a small stage where the town council sat behind a collapsible table. Mayor Patricia Hendricks, a woman Sarah remembered as stern but fair, called the meeting to order with a gavel that looked like it had seen decades of local disputes. We're here to discuss the petition filed by Councilman Reeves regarding the Rodriguez Quarry, she announced. Mr. Reeves, you have the floor. Tommy Reeves stood with the practiced confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way through local politics. He was younger than Sarah had expected, probably late 30s, with the kind of aggressive handsomeness that suggested he'd been the high school quarterback who never quite accepted that his glory days were over. Thank you, Mayor Hendricks, he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the packed room. I filed this petition not out of any personal animosity, but out of genuine concern for public safety. The Rodriguez Quarry has been abandoned for 2 years. The equipment is deteriorating, there are no safety barriers around the water-filled pit, and recent geological surveys suggest potential instability in the quarry walls. Sarah felt her face flush. There had been no recent geological surveys beyond the ones her grandfather had commissioned, and Tommy knew it. Furthermore, Tommy continued, the property owes significant back taxes that threaten to become a burden on county resources. Rather than allow this situation to drag on indefinitely, I propose that we declare the property a public nuisance and work with interested parties to find a solution that benefits the entire community. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Sarah recognized the faces, some nodding in agreement, others looking skeptical. Marcus Webb, the young journalist, sat in the back row taking notes, his expression carefully neutral. Mayor Hendricks looked toward Sarah. Ms. Rodriguez, would you like to respond? Sarah stood on unsteady legs, her mouth dry. Public speaking had never been her strength, and the weight of dozens of eyes made her chest tight. The quarry isn't abandoned. Granite McKinnon has maintained it continuously, and all safety protocols established by my grandfather remain in place. Maintained by whom? Tommy interrupted, his voice sharp with theatrical concern. Mr. McKinnon is 68 years old and has no official authority over the property. If someone were injured, the property is privately owned and clearly posted. Sarah shot back, finding strength in her anger. And as for the taxes, I'm working with the county to establish a payment plan. With what resources? Tommy's smile was cold. Ms. Rodriguez, we all sympathize with your situation, but good intentions don't pay tax bills or prevent accidents. An older woman in the third row stood up. Sarah recognized her as Mrs. Patterson, who'd run the general store when Sarah was young. Tommy Reeves, your daddy tried this same kind of land grab 20 years ago and got run out of town for it. Some of us remember. This isn't about past grievances, Tommy replied smoothly. This is about responsible community planning. Responsible planning. Granite's voice cut through the room like a blade. He stood near the back, his presence commanding attention despite his informal clothes. Boy, you wouldn't know responsible planning if it bit you on your privileged behind. Laughter rippled through the crowd, and Tommy's composed expression cracked slightly. Mr. McKinnon, with all due respect, you're not an impartial observer here. You're damn right I'm not impartial, Granite replied. I've spent 40 years working that land, and I know every inch of it. There's no safety hazard, no environmental threat, and no justification for this power grab except your own greed. Mayor Hendricks banged her gavel. Let's keep this civil. Ms. Rodriguez, do you have a specific plan for addressing the tax obligation? Sarah felt the room's attention focus on her like a spotlight. This was the moment that would determine everything, not just her family's future, but the community's perception of whether she deserved their support or was simply another outsider trying to exploit their desperation. I'm exploring options for responsible development of the property, she said carefully. Development that would create local jobs while preserving environmental integrity. What kind of development? Someone called from the middle of the room. Sarah hesitated. Dr. Vasquez had warned her about revealing too much too soon, but the crowd's skepticism was palpable. They needed something concrete to believe in. The quarry sits on mineral deposits that could be extracted using sustainable methods, she said. Methods that would provide long-term employment for local workers while protecting the environment. The room erupted in conversation. Tommy Reeves looked genuinely surprised, as if this possibility hadn't occurred to him. Marcus Webb was scribbling frantically in his notebook. What kind of minerals? Mayor Hendricks asked, her voice cutting through the noise. Sarah took a deep breath. Rare earth elements, essential for renewable energy technology. The revelation changed the room's energy completely. Faces that had been skeptical now showed interest, even excitement. These were people who'd watched their community slowly die as mining jobs disappeared. The possibility of new industry, sustainable industry, was exactly what many had been hoping for. Tommy recovered quickly. That's quite a claim, Ms. Rodriguez. Do you have documentation to support it? Geological surveys commissioned by my grandfather and analyzed by Montana State University, Sarah replied, surprised by her own confidence. Surveys that somehow nobody else knows about? Tommy's voice carried a note of desperation now. I know about them. Dr. Elena Vasquez's voice came from the side door, where she'd apparently just entered. I conducted them personally. The room fell silent as Dr. Vasquez walked to the front, her presence lending scientific credibility to Sarah's claims. She was still in field clothes, dusty jeans and a university windbreaker, but her authority was unmistakable. The Rodriguez Quarry contains one of the most significant rare earth deposits discovered in North America in the past decade, she announced. With proper development, it could provide sustainable employment for this community for generations. Tommy's face had gone pale. Dr. Vasquez, surely you understand that environmental review processes have already begun, she interrupted. And preliminary results suggest that in situ extraction methods could recover the minerals with minimal environmental impact. Sarah watched the crowd's faces transform as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about saving her family's property. It was about saving their community. Jobs, tax revenue, a future for young people who'd been leaving Stone Creek in droves. But she also saw the fear in some faces, the skepticism born from too many broken promises. Mining companies had made grand claims before, then left behind poison water and empty promises. How do we know this won't be another boom and bust? Called out Joe Martinez, whose family had lost their ranch to a copper mining operation that had folded after 5 years. Sarah looked at Danny, who nodded encouragingly, then back at the crowd. Because this won't be controlled by outside corporations. If we move forward, it'll be as a community-owned cooperative. Local ownership, local jobs, local control over environmental standards. The room buzzed with conversation again. It was an audacious proposal, unprecedented in Sarah's experience, probably unprecedented in Montana's mining history. But it was also exactly what these people needed to hear. Hope coupled with control, prosperity that wouldn't disappear when market conditions changed. Tommy Reeves was on his feet again. This is all very idealistic, but Ms. Rodriguez has no experience in mining operations, no capital for development, and frankly, no proof that any of this is actually feasible. She has something more valuable than experience or capital. Rose McKinnon's voice carried from the front row. She has Eduardo Rodriguez's granddaughter's heart and her son's scientific mind. Sometimes that's enough to build something lasting. Mayor Hendricks banged her gavel again. I think we've heard enough for tonight. The council will take this under advisement and make a decision within 30 days. As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and terror. She'd committed herself and her community to a path she barely understood, promised things she had no idea how to deliver. But for the first time since inheriting the quarry, she felt like she was moving toward something rather than running away from it. Marcus Webb approached her as she gathered her things. Ms. Rodriguez, I'd like to do a story about this. The cooperative model, the environmental implications, it could be exactly the kind of positive example the industry needs. Sarah nodded, though she wondered if media attention was wise given the precarious nature of their situation. Just be careful about the details. There are people who'd rather this opportunity didn't succeed. As they walked to the parking lot, Danny slipped his hand into hers. Mom, do you think we can really do it? Build something that works for everyone? Sarah looked back at the community center, where small groups of residents were still talking animatedly about possibilities and concerns. I don't know, sweetheart, but I think we have to try. The morning after the town hall meeting, Sarah woke to find 3 missed calls from Victoria Sterling and a text message that made her blood run cold. Community meetings are interesting, but they don't change market realities. You have 48 hours to reconsider our offer before we explore alternative acquisition strategies. Danny was already awake, sitting cross-legged on his bed with his laptop, scrolling through articles about rare earth mining disasters. His face was pale, and Sarah could see the weight of responsibility settling on his 12-year-old shoulders. Mom, look at this, he said, turning the screen toward her. The article showed photographs of a mining operation in China, scarred earth, contaminated water, workers in hazmat suits. What if we're wrong? What if there's no way to do this without destroying everything? Sarah sat beside him, looking at the devastating images. The environmental cost of traditional rare earth extraction was indeed horrific. Massive open pits, toxic chemical processing, radioactive waste that remained dangerous for centuries. The very minerals that powered clean energy technology were extracted through some of the dirtiest industrial processes on Earth. That's why we need Dr. Vasquez, she said, though her own doubts were growing. She mentioned sustainable extraction methods. Her phone rang. Dr. Vasquez's name appeared on the caller ID, as if summoned by their conversation. Sarah, I need to see you immediately. Elena's voice was tense. Bring Danny. We're going on a field trip. They met Dr. Vasquez at the University Geology building, where she loaded them into a battered Jeep Cherokee filled with scientific equipment. We're going to look at what happens when mining companies prioritize profit over environmental responsibility, she said grimly. Then we'll look at what's possible when they don't. The first stop was 90 minutes north, where Titan Mining had operated a molybdenum mine until 3 years ago. The site looked like a moonscape. Acres of gray tailings, ponds surrounded by dead trees, and warning signs about contaminated groundwater. A chain-link fence topped with barbed wire kept them at a distance, but even from the road, they could see the orange-stained water and smell the metallic tang of heavy metal contamination. Titan Mining extracted molybdenum here for 8 years, Dr. Vasquez explained. When the ore grades dropped and prices fell, they declared bankruptcy and walked away. The cleanup costs are estimated at $200 million. The taxpayers of Montana will be dealing with this for the next century. Danny stared at the devastation, his face reflecting the horror of seeing industrial destruction up close. This could happen to our quarry? If you sell to the wrong people, absolutely, Dr. Vasquez confirmed. Companies like Titan specialize in extracting maximum value with minimum investment in environmental protection. They budget for lawsuits and cleanup costs as part of doing business. Sarah felt sick. The magnitude of what they were considering, the potential for destroying not just their property but their entire community, suddenly felt overwhelming. Elena, tell me there's another way. There is. But first, I want you to see what that looks like. The second stop was another hour's drive, at a small rare earth operation run by Northern Rare Earth Technologies, a Canadian company that Dr. Vasquez had mentioned. The contrast with the Titan site was striking. Instead of massive open pits, the operation consisted of a series of small drilling platforms connected by underground pipes. The processing facility looked more like a high-tech laboratory than a traditional mining operation. James Harrison, the site manager, met them at the gate. He was a soft-spoken engineer in his 50s who spoke with the passion of someone doing work he believed in. Traditional rare earth extraction requires processing enormous quantities of ore with hydrofluoric acid and other nasty chemicals. He explained as he led them through the facility. Our in-situ leaching process injects biodegradable solvents directly into the ore body underground, then pumps the mineral-rich solution to the surface for processing. Danny perked up immediately. So you don't have to dig up the whole deposit? Exactly. We can extract about 80% of the rare earths with minimal surface disturbance. The environmental footprint is about 1/100th the size of conventional mining. Harrison showed them monitoring wells that tracked groundwater quality in real time. We've been operating here for 3 years, and our environmental impact studies show no contamination beyond the immediate extraction zone. Sarah studied the operation with growing hope. What about economics? Can this method be profitable? The processing costs are higher, Harrison admitted, but rare earth prices have increased enough to make it viable, especially for high-grade deposits like yours. Based on Dr. Vasquez's preliminary assessment, your deposit could support a 20-year operation employing about 40 people full-time. 40 jobs for 20 years, Sarah repeated. In a town like Stone Creek, that represented the difference between survival and slow death, Dr. Vasquez pulled out a tablet showing economic projections. Sarah, if you partnered with Northern Rare Earth and structured it as a community-owned cooperative, the revenue projections are extraordinary. After operational costs and environmental compliance, the community could see annual revenues of $15 to $20 million. The numbers were staggering, but Sarah had learned to be cautious about projections that seemed too good to be true. What are the risks? Market volatility is the biggest one, Harrison said honestly. Rare earth prices can fluctuate based on Chinese trade policy, changes in technology demand, new deposit discoveries elsewhere. But the current trajectory suggests strong demand for at least the next decade. What about regulatory approval? Sarah asked. Dr. Vasquez's expression grew serious. That's where things get complicated. Environmental impact assessments typically take 18 to 24 months. During that time, your property remains vulnerable to acquisition attempts or legal challenges. As if summoned by the mention of legal challenges, Sarah's phone rang. Sam Morrison, her grandfather's lawyer, sounded stressed. Sarah, we have a problem. Tommy Reeves just filed a new petition claiming the quarry poses an imminent environmental threat due to unknown subsurface contamination. He's demanding immediate soil and water testing at your expense. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the walls closing in again. How much would that cost? Minimum $50,000 for comprehensive testing. Money you don't have, which is exactly the point. After ending the call, Sarah stood looking at the Northern Rare Earth operation, torn between hope and desperation. The sustainable extraction model offered everything she wanted: environmental responsibility, community benefit, long-term prosperity. But getting there required navigating a minefield of legal challenges, regulatory hurdles, and corporate opposition that seemed designed to favor well-funded outsiders over local communities. Danny had been quiet during most of the facility tour, but now he spoke up. Mr. Harrison, how long did it take you to get all the permits and approvals for this operation? 3 years from initial application to first production, Harrison replied. And we had the advantage of working in a jurisdiction that was actively trying to attract rare earth development. We don't have 3 years, Sarah said quietly. We might not have 3 weeks. Dr. Vasquez put a hand on her shoulder. Sarah, there might be another option. If you could demonstrate community support and environmental responsibility, we might be able to get emergency designation for strategic mineral development. It's a federal program designed to fast-track domestic rare earth production for national security reasons. What would that require? A comprehensive development plan showing community ownership, environmental protection measures, and evidence that the deposit is strategically significant. It's a long shot, but it could cut the approval process down to 6 months. Sarah looked at Danny, who was studying the monitoring equipment with the intense focus he brought to everything that captured his scientific curiosity. Her son had started all of this with a simple geological observation. Now they stood at a crossroads that would determine not just their family's future, but the environmental and economic future of their entire community. Elena, Sarah said finally, if we pursue this path, the community cooperative, the sustainable extraction, the federal designation, what are our chances of success? Dr. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. Honestly, maybe 30%. The obstacles are enormous. The opposition will be fierce, and the regulatory process is designed to favor established players. But Sarah, if you succeed, you'll have created a model that could transform how America approaches mineral extraction. You'll have proven that communities can control their own economic destiny while protecting their environment. As they drove back towards Stone Creek, Sarah felt the weight of an impossible choice. She could take Victoria Sterling's offer, solve her immediate financial problems, and walk away from a community that barely knew her. Or she could fight for a future that might never come, risking everything on the chance that sustainable development and community ownership weren't just idealistic dreams. Danny seemed to sense her internal struggle. Mom, what do you think great-grandfather would do? Sarah thought about her grandfather's letters, his belief in her ability to make hard choices, his faith that she would choose responsibility over easy profit. I think he'd want us to try to do the right thing, even if it's hard. Even if we might lose everything? Sarah reached over and squeezed her son's hand. Maybe especially then. As Stone Creek came into view in the valley below, Sarah made her decision. They would fight for the community, for the environment, for the possibility that there was a better way to balance human need with natural preservation. It might be a losing battle, but it would be a battle worth fighting. The question now was whether they could move fast enough to outmaneuver the forces arrayed against them, and whether a community that had suffered so many disappointments could find the courage to believe in one more promise of a better future. The emergency town council meeting was called for 8 a.m. Thursday morning, just 48 hours before Victoria Sterling's ultimatum expired. Sarah hadn't slept, spending the night reviewing environmental impact studies and community ownership models with Dr. Vasquez while Danny dozed fitfully on the motel room's second bed, his geology textbook still open beside him. The community center was packed again, but the energy felt different. More desperate, more divided. Victoria Sterling sat in the front row, her black suit and silver hair marking her as distinctly separate from the flannel shirts and work boots that dominated the rest of the room. She was flanked by 2 men Sarah didn't recognize. Lawyers, probably, or corporate specialists brought in to handle whatever resistance they encountered. Tommy Reeves stood at the council table, a stack of official-looking documents spread before him. His smile was triumphant as he addressed the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I've received the preliminary soil analysis from the Rodriguez Quarry, and the results are deeply troubling. He held up a bound report. Elevated levels of heavy metals in the groundwater, potential contamination from decades of limestone processing, and significant structural instability in the quarry walls. Sarah felt her stomach drop. That's impossible. The quarry has been tested multiple times over the years. By whom? Tommy interrupted. By your grandfather's people? By contractors with a financial interest in minimizing problems? He gestured toward Victoria. Ms. Sterling's company has generously offered to conduct an independent assessment at no cost to the county, but the preliminary results suggest we may be looking at a Superfund site. The room erupted in worried conversation. Sarah recognized the fear in people's faces. They'd seen what environmental contamination could do to property values and health. The specter of a Superfund designation would make the quarry worthless and potentially liable for millions in cleanup costs. Mr. Reeves, Dr. Vasquez's voice cut through the noise as she stood from her seat near the back. Could you share the methodology used for this soil analysis? Because according to EPA standards, preliminary assessments require at least 48 hours of testing protocols, and you filed your petition less than 24 hours ago. Tommy's confidence wavered slightly. The testing was conducted using rapid assessment techniques, which have a margin of error of plus or minus 40% and are not admissible for regulatory purposes. Dr. Vasquez continued, walking to the front of the room. I've brought my own soil samples, collected yesterday using EPA-approved methods and analyzed at Montana State University's certified laboratory. She placed a folder on the council table. These results show groundwater quality well within normal parameters for limestone quarry operations, no heavy metal contamination, and structural stability consistent with properly maintained industrial sites. Victoria Sterling spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to boardroom confrontations. Dr. Vasquez, while we respect your academic credentials, my company employs certified environmental consultants with decades of field experience. Our preliminary assessment suggests significant risks that warrant immediate action. Action that coincidentally requires selling the property to your company, Sarah said, finding her voice despite the tremor in her hands. Victoria's smile was cold, professional. Ms. Rodriguez, I understand this is emotional for you, but business decisions shouldn't be based on sentiment. The reality is that you lack the resources to properly remediate this site, assuming remediation is even possible. Marcus Webb stood up from his position near the wall, notebook in hand. Ms. Sterling, could you comment on Titan Mining's environmental record at the Blackfoot molybdenum site? Because my research shows $200 million in taxpayer-funded cleanup costs after your company walked away from that operation. The question landed like a physical blow. Victoria's composed expression cracked, and Sarah saw something dangerous flash in her eyes. That situation was entirely different. Market conditions. Market conditions that your company failed to adequately plan for, Marcus pressed. Just as you failed to plan for environmental protection. Why should Stone Creek trust you with their community's future? Victoria stood, her movement sharp with barely controlled anger. Young man, you're clearly operating with incomplete information. Titan Mining has operated dozens of successful projects across North America and abandoned at least 6 of them when they became unprofitable, leaving local communities to deal with the environmental consequences. Marcus replied, consulting his notes. I've spoken with officials in 3 states who describe a pattern of promises made and broken. The room's energy was shifting. Sarah could see doubt creeping into faces that had been skeptical of her environmental claims. Victoria sensed it too, and her response was swift and calculated. The bottom line, she said, addressing the crowd rather than Marcus, is that Ms. Rodriguez is asking you to gamble your community's future on an unproven extraction method operated by people with no mining experience. My company offers certainty, guaranteed jobs, guaranteed tax revenue, guaranteed environmental compliance. Guaranteed until you decide the operation isn't profitable anymore. Granite's voice carried from the back of the room. Then you'll be gone, and we'll be left with the mess. Victoria turned to face him, her expression shifting to something that resembled sympathy. Mr. McKinnon, I understand your loyalty to the Rodriguez family, but loyalty doesn't pay cleanup costs or provide health insurance for workers who develop respiratory problems from unregulated mining operations. You're talking about health problems? Sarah stood, her voice rising with indignation. Your preliminary assessment, the one you claim shows contamination, was conducted without proper safety protocols. If there really was contamination, you would have put your own people at risk by rushing the testing. The accusation hung in the air, and Sarah saw Victoria's mask slip completely for just a moment. There was cold calculation there, the look of someone who'd built a career on exploiting other people's vulnerabilities. Ms. Rodriguez, Victoria said, her voice returning to its professional modulation. You're clearly under tremendous stress, making decisions about complex environmental and financial matters when you're emotionally compromised. Don't. The word came out harder than Sarah intended. Don't you dare patronize me. I'm a nurse. I understand risk assessment, I understand reading scientific data, and I understand when someone is trying to manipulate me by questioning my competence. Danny stood up beside her, his young voice carrying clearly across the room. My mom beat cancer while working 2 jobs to support us. She's not emotionally compromised. She's the strongest person I know. The simple declaration from a 12-year-old boy somehow carried more weight than all the expert testimony and corporate presentations. Sarah felt the room's energy shift again, this time toward something that felt like solidarity. Mayor Hendricks banged her gavel. I think we've heard enough arguments. The council needs to vote on Mr. Reeves's petition to declare the quarry a public nuisance. Before you vote, Sarah said, her voice steady now, I want to make one thing clear. If you declare my grandfather's quarry a public nuisance based on fraudulent environmental data, I will fight it in court. And when the real environmental assessments prove that Tommy Reeves and Titan Mining lied to manipulate this process, I will make sure everyone knows exactly what happened here. The threat was delivered quietly, but it carried the weight of absolute conviction. Sarah had found something in herself she hadn't known existed, the kind of steel-backed determination that had driven her grandfather to build an empire from Montana limestone. Victoria Sterling stood abruptly, gathering her papers with sharp, efficient movements. Counselors, my company's offer remains open until 5 p.m. today. After that, we'll pursue other opportunities. She paused at the door, looking back at Sarah with undisguised contempt. I hope your principles keep you warm when you're living in your car. The door closed behind her with finality that seemed to echo through the room. Tommy Reeves looked around nervously, apparently realizing that his corporate backing had just walked out on him. Mayor Hendricks called for the vote. The result was closer than Sarah had hoped. 4 votes against declaring the quarry a nuisance, 3 in favor. A narrow victory, but still a victory. As the crowd dispersed, people approached Sarah with a mixture of support and concern. Some offered help, labor, equipment, expertise. Others expressed worry about the risks of challenging a company as powerful as Titan Mining. Rose McKinnon was the last to approach, her weathered hands taking Sarah's in a grip that was surprisingly strong. Your grandfather would be proud, she said quietly. Not because you won, but because you stood up. That's what the Rodriguez family has always done when it mattered. Outside the community center, Dr. Vasquez pulled Sarah aside. You know this isn't over, right? Victoria Sterling doesn't strike me as someone who accepts defeat gracefully. I know, Sarah replied, watching the black sedan disappear up Main Street. But we bought ourselves time. Time to file for the federal strategic mineral designation, time to build community support, time to prove that sustainable mining can work. Danny appeared at her side, his geology hammer in his hand and determination in his young face. Mom, what do we do next? Sarah looked at her son, then at the town where her grandfather had built his life and legacy, then at the mountains that held secrets worth fighting for. Next, we build something that's never been built before, and we hope it's strong enough to survive what's coming. The confrontation was over, but Sarah knew the real battle was just beginning. Victoria Sterling's parting words weren't just a threat, they were a promise. And Sarah had to believe that her grandfather's faith in her, the community's tentative trust, and her son's brilliant mind would be enough to face whatever came next. 6 months later, Sarah stood at the edge of the quarry watching the first extraction well being drilled. The sound was different from the heavy machinery her grandfather had used, quieter, more precise, like surgery rather than excavation. Danny crouched nearby, collecting water samples for the daily environmental monitoring that had become as routine as checking the weather. The federal strategic mineral designation had come through faster than anyone expected, helped by growing tensions with China over rare earth exports and Marcus Webb's series of articles highlighting the potential for domestic production. Northern Rare Earth Technologies had partnered with the newly formed Stone Creek Mining Cooperative, creating a hybrid model that satisfied both federal regulators and community concerns. Mom, Look at these readings, Danny called out, studying his tablet. The 12-year-old who had discovered the deposit was now 13 and served as the cooperative's unofficial chief geological observer. The groundwater quality is actually improving since we started extraction. Dr. Vasquez was right about the natural filtration process. Sarah smiled, watching her son work with the same careful attention to detail that had started everything. The past months had transformed them both. Danny had grown more confident, more aware of his abilities, while Sarah had discovered strengths she'd never known she possessed. The cooperative itself was a complex entity that no one had quite expected to work. 43 families in Stone Creek owned shares, with profits distributed based on both financial investment and labor contribution. Sarah retained controlling interest as the primary landowner, but major decisions required community approval. It was messy, sometimes contentious, but it was theirs. Rose McKinnon appeared beside them, carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who'd witnessed justice being served. Granite's bringing the monthly revenue report to the meeting tonight. Want a preview? Sarah nodded, though the numbers still sometimes felt surreal. After operational costs and environmental compliance, the cooperative had generated $2.3 million in its first 6 months of operation. Not the astronomical figures Victoria Sterling might have extracted through conventional mining, but enough to transform Stone Creek's economy while preserving its character. Tommy Reeves is moving to Billings, Rose added with obvious satisfaction. Seems his consulting business hasn't been the same since people learned about his relationship with Titan Mining. The investigation triggered by Marcus Webb's reporting had revealed the extent of Tommy's coordination with Victoria Sterling. While not technically illegal, the revelation had destroyed his credibility and his local political career. Sarah felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only relief that one threat had been neutralized. What about Victoria? Danny asked, looking up from his samples. Last I heard, she was working on a copper project in Chile, Rose replied. Titan Mining's been having regulatory problems ever since Marcus's articles went national. Turns out communities across the country have been comparing notes about their business practices. As evening approached, Sarah and Danny walked back toward town for the monthly cooperative meeting. The changes in Stone Creek were subtle but significant. Fresh paint on storefronts, new businesses opening, young families moving back as mining jobs became available again. The population had grown by nearly 15%, and the school that had been threatened with closure now needed additional teachers. The meeting was held in the high school gym, the only space large enough to accommodate all the cooperative members. Granite served as operational manager, bringing the same meticulous attention to detail that had kept the quarry running for 4 decades. Dr. Vasquez attended by video link from the university, providing scientific oversight and environmental reporting. Production is steady at about 80% of projected capacity, Granite reported, his weathered hands steady as he referenced charts and graphs that would have seemed impossible for a former foreman to master. Environmental metrics are all within acceptable ranges, and we're ahead of schedule for the processing facility expansion. Sarah listened to the reports with a mixture of pride and continued amazement that they'd actually made it work. The sustainable extraction process was proving more efficient than Northern Rare Earth had predicted, while the cooperative structure had created a level of worker investment and environmental consciousness that traditional mining operations rarely achieved. After the formal meeting, Sarah found herself alone in the gym with Danny, gathering papers and reflecting on how dramatically their lives had changed. The financial security was important. Her medical bills were paid, Danny's college fund was growing, and they'd been able to buy a small house in town. But the sense of belonging was even more valuable. "Mom," Danny said quietly, "do you think great-grandfather knew this would happen when he left us the quarry?" Sarah considered the question, thinking about her grandfather's final letter and his faith in her ability to choose wisely. "I think he knew there was something valuable in the ground, but I don't think he could have imagined how we'd choose to use it. Do you think he would approve?" Sarah looked around the gym where 3 generations of Stone Creek residents had learned and grown, then out the windows toward the quarry where sustainable technology was extracting ancient minerals for renewable energy applications. "I think he'd be proud that we found a way to honor both the land and the community." That we chose responsibility over easy profit. Danny nodded, satisfied with the answer. At 13, he was already talking about studying environmental engineering, about developing even more sustainable extraction methods. The boy who'd started this journey with a geological hammer and boundless curiosity was becoming a young man with the knowledge and motivation to continue improving it. As they walked home through the quiet streets of Stone Creek, Sarah felt the deep satisfaction that comes from building something lasting. The cooperative wasn't just about mineral extraction. It was about proving that communities could control their own economic destiny while protecting the environment they depended on. It hadn't been easy. There had been setbacks, conflicts, moments when the whole enterprise seemed impossible. But they'd persevered, supported by the belief that there was a better way to balance human need with environmental responsibility. The quarry lights glowed softly in the distance, marking the location where Sarah's grandfather had carved a legacy from limestone, and where she and Danny had discovered that some treasures were worth more than their monetary value. They'd found not just rare earth minerals, but something even rarer, hope for a future where prosperity and preservation could coexist. Their story was just beginning, but Sarah knew they'd already achieved something remarkable. They'd proven that with courage, community support, and scientific wisdom, it was possible to write a new chapter in the ancient story of humans and the earth they called home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.